Welcome, Kieron. Welcome. Thanks for joining me here today. I'm excited to chat about traveling, banking, and many other things. So thanks for joining me.
Very excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I usually start off with a little bit of a self-introduction, as I always say. So if you don't mind just telling us a little bit about your background.
No problem at all. Entrepreneur for best part of 3 decades now. It makes me feel like I'm 107 when I say that. But started in business after doing a stint in education. So, a high school teacher for a while. And just prior to that, worked in a trade association for the fashion industry in the UK. So, my first venture in business was with a web design business back in 1998. And then really been through a whole gamut of different industries and sectors, from company formations online to domain name registrations online, then telecommunication services, and most recently, via online charity giving, I've ended up doing payments. So it's been quite varied. Some common themes which we can explore if you want to do so. But basically, yeah, a number of different online businesses for feels like an eternity.
It's not so long. Don't don't do that to yourself. But but sure, that's amazing. So you got 3 decades of experience. You got more than I do, that's for sure. So, but that's always a good thing. So,
It's
why don't
interesting. I get off the train in Shoreditch in London, where we're based, and I do feel quite old because obviously there's all these fintech startup companies and very young and very trendy people hanging around. But no, it's a great environment to be in. It really is.
yeah, you said you were based out of Shoreditch before we jumped on the call.
Yeah, yeah. It's a lovely part of the world. So very close to the city, but very happening. So really, lots of art and culture going on around the space as well, which I really like.
So, would you consider that sort of the Silicon Valley of the UK?
I guess to an extent so, but with a particular focus on fintech. There seems to be a lot of financial technical services type businesses based around here, some shared office space as well. I guess historically it was kind of a cheaper area of London, although I think that's less the case now. So the rents would have historically been a bit lower for the startups and so on.
Hmm.
Um, but no, it's a great community, and you are very close to everything, but far enough out as well to feel like you've got a bit of tranquility.
Yeah, I mean, when I think, I mean, it makes sense that it would be fintech because when I think of London, I think of either banking, as far as business goes, but I think of banking or insurance. I almost got into that industry a little bit after graduate school, and actually applied to a few jobs at first in London, just because I love the city. It's one of the best. I have unpopular opinion as an American that London is far superior to New York. Um, So, and I can challenge anybody that on that one. But
I love New York as well. One of the advantages of where we are here. So we're based in a building called Rise that's operated by Barclays Bank, funnily enough. But they also have a facility in just near the Flatiron Building in New York. So whenever I'm over there, which is reasonably frequently, it's great because I can just hang out and there's no additional charge. And I'd probably challenge you and say I prefer New York to London. So we need to swap places.
you just need to swap places. I find that people just like what they didn't have growing up, right? They like the change, right? So
Exactly.
so so is this sort of a co-working space, or this has to do with your business, or why you're saying that there's the same building in New York?
So yeah, it is. It's a co-working space, but it's much more than that. Rise is they call it the fintech hub. So there's lots of networking. You've got to be a fintech to be in this space. And actually, again, they'll kind of look at what's happening in the industry generally, and I guess favor to an extent certain businesses. So there's a particular focus when we moved into this building on ESG, sustainability, all of those areas. So it's not like a private club, but to an extent it kind of is as well. It's definitely like-minded people in the building. Some amazing networking events, again, some of those hybrids. So we link up with New York and we'll do hybrid events with New York as well. It's fabulous to be honest. I love it.
Yeah, and people tend to undervalue just being surrounded by people that have your same mentality, right? I mean, it can be energizing and I've gone to some different events and such, and you walk out of them just being like, oh, like I'm not the only lunatic that wants to do some of this stuff, you know?
Absolutely.
So
Ex-
it's fine. It's good to always find your community. So
yeah, no, I really do. It was one of, I often say to people, and I think we're a big advocate for Rise on social as well. If there are any posts about Rise, I'll tend to support them. But I do often say it's one of the best decisions we made to come in here. It's been really, really good.
I'll have to check out some social media on Rise and
Hey,
stuff.
they also have their own podcast. Look, I sound like a salesperson for Rise. Yeah, they do a think that podcast as well.
No, that's great. I'll check it out. Thanks for the recommendation. But since we're on the topic, maybe we can go ahead and just chat about just working in different places. I'm currently in El Salvador. I was in Colombia before that, and um, you know, some people there's this image of being a digital nomad these days, right? And it's not all it's said to be, but there's definitely some great moments. So I was just wondering if you can give your perspective and your experience on that.
Absolutely. Let me circle back again to when I started. So I mentioned teaching was probably the first job that I did after working in the trade association. And really, I started doing that because I wanted to travel. So the trade association brought me to London because really I wanted to be in a band and it paid the rent. So I was in a band when I was down in London, did that for a few years. And then first child arrived after we got married, and I thought, I do want to travel, do want to see the world a little bit. What can I do? What profession can I enter that's going to allow me to do that? And teaching seemed quite an obvious one. So qualified as a teacher, took a role in the UK initially, but immediately, actually, even before I took the role in the UK, I interviewed for a job which I didn't get in Colombia. Um, Took the job in the UK, thought, well, let's just get some teaching years under my belt and then I'll start to look again. And ended up going out to the Middle East and working in Oman for a period of time, running a training institute over in Oman. Again, it was one of those things that I think it was more the circumstances of the programs they were operating out there not being 100% fit for the market they were operating in. So that drew to a close, and I ended up back in the UK again, looking for something to do. And that's really when I started my first business, more out of necessity than anything else. It was, what can I do next? I don't really want to find another job. And I think one of the beauties which has evolved over the last period of time, I don't think this was necessarily the case from day one, but working in the space that I'm working now does allow me to be pretty much anywhere. And over the years, we've done that. I think we did a stint in Costa Rica for 3 months when we were running the telecoms business. And the hours there, the time difference worked really well with the UK because I found if I organized myself well, I could have the day finished and be done with all of my meetings in time for being on the beach and enjoying the weather, which was fabulous.
That's funny. I would have thought that the time difference is not great, but I guess as an American, I'm thinking the time is forward over there, and it doesn't work out for me, right? So
Yeah,
the reverse works out. So
it was really good. I mean, we definitely scheduled a couple of those meetings to meet my demands, but it was good. It worked well. Everyone was very happy with that.
yeah, but that's one of the benefits of running your own business, right? You can sort of mold it around your schedule rather than others.
Exactly.
I think that's what a lot of people sort of get into this world for in the beginning, right?
Yep.
Leading their own lives as opposed to having others lead theirs, right? So
Completely. And I think taking it on from there again, just moving forward, when everyone started remote working, we've been doing during COVID. I mean, we've been doing that for a little while because one of the businesses in telecoms, there are a couple that we were running. One was focused on call centers and providing a network for those guys. But the other was telephone conferencing. So we were already doing that before, long before COVID was announced. And I guess it's one of those, if you're selling a service about telephone conferencing, then you really ought to be doing it yourself. So we pretty rapidly all moved remotely and out of the office, even at that time, which is probably about 2016, I'm guessing.
So what's your take on working, I guess I'm going to say it as working from home, especially as an employer? Um, it's difficult to know what people are doing and how they're managing their time. As an employee, I think just from that perspective of um, managing your own time as well, it's difficult because you're at home. There's the kitchen's right there, and you're not in the hustle mindset, if for lack of better words, right? So then there's definitely a waste of time, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, there are pros and cons. There's no doubt that an office collaborative environment has its benefits in terms of just those little bits of information you might pick up, not in a formal meeting, but the classic kind of by the water cooler or grabbing a cup of coffee with someone that you do miss in the remote environment. And I think that's true. Um, that said, I think in terms of offering people work now, if you don't have remote working in that job description, then you are limiting your choices massively. Certainly in our sector, and looking for developers and engineers and those kind of people. I mean, I'm sure I read a stat a little while ago that there were 10 times the number of applicants for a job where it was tagged with remote working than there are without that tag. And that wouldn't surprise me if that's the case.
mm,
So, the drawbacks of that kind of, almost serendipitous conversation that you find a solution to a problem and it wasn't in a formal setting that you can miss out on. So you've got to engineer those conversations. So we use, again, I guess most businesses will use one form or another, whether it's Slack. We actually use Discord for a lot of the day-to-day chats. And that will start very often with a text conversation, but might morph into let's just jump on a quick video call. I'm a really big supporter of using video as much as possible. So I don't insist on it, but I tend to make it a fairly strong desire on my part that people turn on the videos because you just capture so much with a facial expression. You're making an announcement, you can quickly look at the screen and see how it's being received without anyone saying a word. I think so kind of dealing with benefits and or pros and cons at the same time. But I think the other benefit for the self-starter is just moving away from that 9 to 5 and actually letting people be productive at the times that suit them best. I recognize again that doesn't work in every department in the business because not all of your customers are working at 7 p.m. or are available at 7 p.m. So it may be that you've got to have a customer support facility that's fitting in a normal 9 to 5 working day. But if you're on a development job of coding, then, why does that time slot matter? It doesn't. You're not necessarily the most creative then. So I think we've moved much more from a 9 to 5 to actually results based. We need this delivering in this amount of time. What hours during which days you put in, I don't really mind as long as we've got to that release by X date. And again, you've got to be pragmatic about that and sensible with the team and making sure they're available for meetings and so on. But broadly, we don't insist on the 9 to 5 at all.
mm. Yeah, I mean, what you said about being creative at certain times, obviously there's people that are morning people, morning person, and then there's not morning person, such as myself. Um, but one of the things I've noticed is, I have bouts of productivity. Maybe some Saturdays I wake up and I want to work. Right. And then maybe some random Tuesday I don't. And when I was still on sort of a 9 to 5 schedule, I noticed that there were several hours that were just wasted. And as a person that's, like you were saying, self-starter, I found that as a wasted time, right? And not to mention the commutes and several other things. So for people that are trying to find more time in their day to, you know, maybe start their first entrepreneurial venture, a work from home job makes much more sense. You have at least, I'd say, 3 or 4 more hours in the day, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a logistics decision that makes sense. So
Completely. But I guess your point in asking the question is also that question about what time of the day do I stop, because it's so easy just to carry on, and you've got to be super careful with that passion and enthusiasm for a business that you've just launched, that you don't work 18 hours a day, at least not every day, because you will just get burnt out very rapidly. So there's definitely a discipline around that and making sure that you switch off. And I think for me, actually, it's going beyond just switching off. Literally is switching off the computer so it's out of the way. And similarly, the phone goes into do not disturb mode, and I'll try and push it on one side of the of the room and ignore it as much as possible, get a book out or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I actually had, what was it? A podcast guest that I had to reschedule. And when I wanted to reschedule, I'm fine with working late. So, on my calendar, I have open till like 7 or 8 p.m. And I offered to reschedule to 7 p.m. or something like that one day. And he was like, no, that's family time. And I was like, that makes, that. So we can all just set our boundaries and what we want to do. Right. And that's the beauty of it. We can sort of, make our own decision rather than being told.
Definitely. And I
Right.
really like, I don't know whether it was Google that started this or it's my Apple calendar, but wherever it came from, but this concept of focus time, I really love as well. Just being able to block out that. So again, remote working, we tend to just give people access to our calendars, at least in terms of availability, and can book slots if it's a more formal, longer meeting. And there are certain parts of the week that I will just block out as focus time because again, there are days that you just need to get your head down and you don't want to be disturbed with a meeting because if you're a coder coding or if you're, writing a proposition for a new client or something like that. So I think it is that. I think that's really important, Andres, this idea of kind of bringing the discipline. And that's got to be from you to say, these are the hours that I'm doing this and these are the hours that I'm not.
Right. Just a decision you got to make.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I mean, the moving into this digital age has just been a blessing in terms of being able to do it from pretty much anywhere. It's fabulous. Now we've got solid internet in most places as well.
Sometimes it can be worrisome to have a podcast and not sure that you're going to have Wi-Fi or just as dependable Wi-Fi and things like that. But
Yeah.
where all have you worked? Or I mean, you said Costa Rica. I think I saw something. You were in Portugal,
Actually, Portugal's one place we've not been.
or Spain rather.
Spain. Yeah, so we're in Spain. So I split my time now. My wife's Spanish,
Mm.
and we've been trying to make this move for a little while, and just kind of never really got round to it. So we were already splitting our time between London and we were in the Cotswolds in a very beautiful part of England for a while, and kind of going up, spending a few days there, then heading back to London for all of the energy and vitality of the city, and the Cotswolds for a bit of a break. And we just thought, why don't we just do the same thing now? We are 25 minutes where we live in London from Gatwick Airport. We can fly either into Gibraltar or into Malaga and be there in a couple of hours. What's to stop us just being in the sun rather than in the kind of fairly bleak weather that we get in England a lot of the
Right.
time?
Right.
So now I absolutely, so I'm off to Spain in the morning, and we'll be there for another, 10 days or so and then back. The thing I'm super conscious of at the moment, though, is that kind of, that air travel and the amount of that. So it'd be great to find a solution that was not so carbon unfriendly to the air travel. But that's
And
one
time consuming, to be honest. People
time consuming.
flights add up, not just monetarily, but just time and several, and like you're saying. So
Yeah. So I think what we tend to do, it's unusual for me to do a short stay over there. We'll tend to go over kind of 8-10 weeks and then come back for 8-10 weeks here, that kind of thing.
yeah, because if you were doing 2-week bouts, then it's difficult to get into a groove. I mean, I find that where I was traveling, sort of around Southeast Asia, working, and I was not being productive at all. And it wasn't. I mean, in my head, I wasn't being productive. I think I was being. Maybe I'm being harsh on myself, but it's difficult to, because you wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, where am I going to eat today? If yeah, it's just simple life, like simple necessities. So I definitely believe in having, maybe if you like being in multiple places, having multiple bases, right? You have a home, a fully established home in Spain. You have a fully established home in England, and then you can go back and forth, right? And yeah,
I think there are so many advantages. Even with our holidays prior to kind of living in two places, there were certain holidays that we've taken over the 30 years we've been married that have been the same place. And when I say the same place, I literally mean the same hotel room. So the same room in the same hotel in the same place. And people go, why would you do that for one? And my answer has always been that for certain holidays, not all of them, so we vary a couple, but one of the annual holidays, it would be just that sense of, I know exactly where the restaurant is. I know exactly who the receptionist is going to be. I know exactly what the layout of the room is, which means the moment I arrive, I just go, and unwind instantly because it's that familiarity of knowing where I am. And I think that always worked really well. Again, if it was a short break, rather than kind of spending the first 24 hours orientating yourself, you're just there and you're in that holiday mode instantly. And I
Yeah.
think the same is true, as you say, for the working in two locations. I arrive and I'm literally just docking my laptop and away I go, which is great.
I'm curious if you have the same feeling as I do as far as, and I'm sure you can feel it between Spain and England, but say, obviously, I'm sure you're more productive in England than you are in Spain. I I don't know if it's the heat or what it is with something with being around beaches, or just it's like Southern Europe versus Northern Europe. It happens in many places in the world, like North America versus South America or America. Um, I'm not sure what it is, but I feel I'm more productive in slightly colder places. I don't know. But
I think there's truth in that. I think in terms of the way that the business is operated and the kinds of things I'm doing in those locations will vary a little bit. So will be different types of productivity. If I know I'm in the UK, then today is an example where I've literally gone from back to back meetings because I know I'm here all week. And I know that's a short stint and it's not normal. But what tends to happen is if you know you're in London for a week and you're a UK based business, everybody wants to meet you during that week. So it's super productive in terms of getting the meetings done. But what I can find I can do much better when I'm in Spain without those distractions is those chunkier bits of work that need to be done where you can just, as I say, get your head down and focus.
sort of like those time blocks that you were mentioning, right? Where people like sort of blocking out time so that people don't, I don't want to say annoy you, but so,
Well, it's a distraction, isn't it? It is just that. Um, but at the same time, there are some staples in that week that are always there. So our weekly team meetings, one-to-ones with key members of the team, and so on. They're just there, irrespective of where I am physically.
Mhm.
And the great thing about the office here, even though we're all remote, is it's a fabulous facility for us to do those monthly team meetings. So everyone will literally get together in person, and we'll always do that.
Amazing. So some of your other employees work in the facility that you're in.
No, only the only other person, my head of operations, and also coincidentally my daughter. We share the space here, but again, we won't necessarily be in at the same time. Sometimes there's an overlap. Oftentimes, I'll be in, and she'll say, "Oh, I fancy working from home today," and she'll work from home. But the one thing is, we do tend to have that monthly meeting where everyone jumps on a plane, train, or whatever, and comes to London. And
S-
those they are great. I think all of the team will say when we finish one of those days, it's different from a virtual meeting for sure. There's just that sense of it's a
Camaraderie.
community, it's a team, exactly.
Hmm. And what's your current business that you're working on?
Right now, we provide an open banking payments service. So, in a nutshell, it's an alternative to paying via credit and debit card that is much cheaper for the merchant. It's simple, it's faster, it's more secure. And in our scenario, it's also backed by the fact that we got started in this particular business solving a problem that we'd encountered for our free online charity fundraising problem platform. And that problem that we'd encountered was that the cost of moving money from a donor to a charity's account was actually becoming quite prohibitive in the model that we were operating, which was completely free. So essentially, we funded that model through corporate sponsorship so that the charities could get every penny from the fundraisers' efforts. And all that was happening was we were going back to the corporate sponsor every month as the platform grew, saying, can we have more and more money to pay our card processing fees? To the point where literally every penny we got from our card processor went to paying from our sponsor went to paying card processing fees. So we needed to find a solution to that problem, and we found it in open banking, a new technology. It's gaining a lot of ground here in the UK and in other markets that support it as well. So now any tax bill you have from HMRC, Majesty's Revenue and Customs here, you can pay using open banking, including actually your tax fines. If you have any of those, they can be paid using open banking as well. So yeah, great technology. We found a particular niche that allows us to provide a service for UK retailers online and offline that's much cheaper than cards, and also has the benefit of instant settlement. So the moment you approve a payment as the customer, the money is in the retailer's bank rather than waiting for that to come from a payment gateway.
There's no 3-day.
There's no 3 days, literally, seconds. In fact, yeah, a lot of the demos that we'll do, if we do them live, we'll have a merchant on one side of the stage and a customer on the other, and you can hear the merchant's mobile phone ping as the money hits their business bank account. So it is great.
Hmm. So can you go a little bit more into, I mean, for somebody that's listening and doesn't know what open banking is, I mean, you've explained it's a new way of making a transaction, but if you could delve a little bit deeper, that'd be great. I mean,
Of course. So the way it works in the UK, there were what's known as the CMA 9 banks. So the Competition and Markets Authority decided 9 banks needed to open up their APIs, allow fintechs like us, to get involved and be able to process with the right regulatory licenses in place, of course, to be able to process payments for consumers. So it was really to spark innovation in that sector. Historically, if you think about how you make a payment, typically it will be via a debit card or a credit card. If you're in an e-commerce environment, you're unlikely to be posting somebody a check when you get to the end of the e-commerce checkout process, or doing a bank transfer. Sometimes you'll see that. What open banking does is it removes all of the intermediaries from that process. So if you're making a payment via card, there's typically quite a number of different parties taking a slice of that payment. It removes all of those and just puts one in the middle, which is, in our case, us. That allows us to reduce those costs by at least 90%. In our case, it's probably more. So we've gone from the normal model with a card of saying, maybe around 1.4%, 1.5%, sometimes more, plus maybe 10 to 20 pence per transaction. We eliminate all of that. And for any transaction, we charge 1 penny. And that's it. So it's incredibly cheap. As I mentioned, it's incredibly quick settlement. You've also got the additional security and removal of friction, because rather than entering a 16-digit card number, CVV, first line of address, zip code, all of that data, which, you risk it being compromised at some point along the chain, there's none of that at all. There's no data entry from the customer's point of view. You're literally opening your mobile banking app. There's a transaction there waiting for you to approve it. You've not entered any sort code, any checking numbers, any account numbers for anyone. So the payment just goes directly to the merchant who's registered with us. So it's really, really fast, really straightforward.
so this is a bank-to-bank transfer then?
Exactly
Hmm.
that. But
Because
without the hassle of entering any bank details, which is the key difference.
And I'm assuming when you're saying these intermediaries, say I mean some of them that I know of is, say, like a company like Plaid, or maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. But and they're playing a part of sort of verifying your identity. So where does that come into play in this process?
In the open banking world, you'd be verifying identities and doing things like anti-money laundering checks, know your customer checks, KYC checks on all of the merchants and charities that we sign up. So we've got a very rigorous process of making sure the entity that you're paying as a consumer or as a donor in the charity scenario has been verified, checked by us. And we partner with other organizations who are specialists in those areas too. So there's a company called Onfido, that do a lot of that KYC checking for us, and again have that API integration to allow us to do that in a super fast and super automated way. So we'd be doing that on all of those. On the transaction from the consumer or donor's point of view, again, unless there are indications that we need to be investigating that transaction for money laundering or so on, then essentially that will be processed and go through, and then we use our fraud monitoring tools and so on to make sure there's none of that taking place.
And is this just within the UK at the moment?
It's not. No, I think there are a number of countries. I know Canada's is very advanced with open banking. Australia too, and a number of countries in the EU. It's one of the areas where it's nice to say the UK certainly was instrumental and a leader in the process through, I think, that regulatory mandate that happened in 2017. I want to say around that time, and that spurred things on for sure. And again, I think that the reference I made to HMRC has been quite instrumental in seeing a lot of volume and a lot of exposure, and a big advocate in terms of a government agency saying, we support this. And quite rightly they should, because that saved UK taxpayers millions of pounds in payment processing fees. Um, and also, again, you're paying your tax at the end of the year's self-assessment. You want to be ensuring that's going to where it's supposed to be going, rather than entering in the digits for an account and we call it a sort code here, and potentially getting that wrong when you're transferring thousands of pounds is worrisome. So removing that from the process with this tokenized payment makes it much, much more straightforward from the payer's point of view as well as paying.
So would you be essentially cutting out companies like Visa and MasterCard and these payment processing companies?
Yeah, so they're not in the loop at all. It is literally direct. It's bank to bank. You'll often see it described as either pay by bank. Some providers call it that. Others call it account to account transactions. So there's a number of different descriptions. We call it instant bank payments. It's all the same thing effectively if the underlying tools for it are open banking.
One of the companies out of the UK that I use a lot is Wise. It's a fintech company, and especially and my question is going toward multiple currencies, but it's one of the it's a great, if somebody doesn't know, this is also unpaid advertising here. Uh, but they use the mid-market rate for currency transactions. Um, they do take a certain few dollars off, for every transaction, especially when you're converting currencies or making bank transfers. So I'm curious your perspective there, because I'm always looking. So, I live in Colombia, and I had to find a different bank account in the US to be able to go to an ATM and get money out. Wise is great, but they limit your ATM transactions. So I'm curious, first, your opinion on Wise, if you have any comments there. And then second, as far as just withdrawing cash, can this help in any aspect?
Let me take those. I'll take them in reverse order. So in terms of withdrawing cash, probably not, because you'll need the ATMs involved in doing that right now. So it's definitely more of a payment solution than a kind of withdrawing cash solution. In terms of the international aspects, we're very focused on the UK, but that's because we are relatively new to this, and the UK is a strong market. It's also, I guess, the lowest hanging fruit for us. These are retailers. There are 5.5 million small businesses in the UK who are absolutely target market for us, because we're getting money into their accounts quickly, solving their cash flow problems, and also solving that cost of payment processing problem. So we've not really looked in detail at international markets yet. I think the regulatory piece is going to be instrumental, certainly in the US, and the US will be a massive market for open banking for obvious reasons. You're ready for it technically in the States, and everyone's got mobile phones. The internet connections are really strong. So once that regulatory piece is in place in the States, I think it will absolutely explode. Turning to Wise, great things. I've seen some amazing demos from Wise at events like Innovate Finance Global Summit. They did a demo of transfers. I think their rates are really strong in terms of the market, as you say, that kind of taking that mid-market price for the exchange rates and so on is very, very good, and seem to be operating, globally and very efficiently. So I think that again, we've seen real-time movement of money that's been in seconds over international borders, which is quite impressive, clearly. I mean, given what we're all used to, it frustrates me a lot of the time that the model that we use for taking payments it's based on technology that was introduced 60 years ago for a completely different world, a completely different world, and actually for a completely different purpose. So we use debit cards now because until open banking really, or I guess PayPal, but you've got similar kind of costs involved in PayPal transactions. But until then, there's not been a viable alternative in an e-commerce environment, and now there is, which is great.
Yeah. Well, there's credit, is there not? Or are you using them interchangeably in this scenario?
In terms of making a payment, so credit, yes, obviously you'll be paying on a monthly basis, but you're paying fairly expensive rates in terms of interest rates for doing that, but also the merchant is paying quite a lot for the privilege of accepting that payment, of being able to take that payment.
Hmm.
Um, my analogy often is that I'll compare the movement of money by, I mentioned checks earlier on, but if I'm posting a check to somebody 15, 20 years ago, and let's take some more modern day rates to compare, but say I put a check in the post to somebody for £50 GBP, and the cost of the stamp that went on the envelope when I posted that check would have been broadly about a year or so ago the cost involved with processing the £50 debit card payment. So those two things were about the same thing, around 70p, something like that. If I then take that check out of the envelope and replace it with a check for £5,000, I wouldn't expect my postage stamp to be 120 quid. And that for me is the analogy. And I think this whole sense of, for a small bit, well, for any business, but for a business to be giving up a share of its revenue just to get paid seems to me to be fundamentally wrong in a digital age, because the costs of processing that transaction are broadly the same. You may argue there's more insurance required for a larger transaction, there's more risk associated, but that's not a linear thing. So therefore, it's great now to have a technology where we have an opportunity to basically charge what I would describe as a fair price for the work that we're doing.
And I guess in a sense, I mean, first of all, we don't have the gold standard anymore, for example, right? So then that's already one step in the one direction. And then you see certain countries start talking about CBDCs, and in essentially there is no physical transaction, right? So other than the money that a bank needs to verify your identity, what are the costs? Like why is it so high?
And my answer to that would often be because it can be. And we go back to the fact you've got probably two dominant players in that space that have become even more dominant as a result of COVID and contactless payments and so on. And it's a model that requires some challenge. And I think the time is now right. Or, certainly in the UK, it's right. This is still reasonably embryonic, and it's been great for us to be able to test this through necessity, because we had to solve that problem for the fundraising platform. But what that's allowed us to do is test this technology, this new payments, innovative technology, on a demographic that you probably wouldn't associate with new payments innovation, the charity sector. So that's been fabulous for us, because it was the one place where we said, we are only going to offer donations through open banking. You will not have an alternative, because that allows us to continue to grow this platform. Otherwise, we're stuck. And forcing people down that route has been fabulous for our learning, but also great for spreading the word. And the reason I say this might sound terrible, but if you're a family member or a colleague or a good friend, and I'm running a marathon and you want to support that, and I give you only one option, and it's the first time you've encountered an open banking transaction, you're probably going to complete it and go, you know what, I want to support this person in this thing. What we see then is that it's like anything with new technology. Once you've done it once and the fear factor is removed, then you'll come back and do it again. And certainly with open banking, when you see the speed you can check out, the speed you've done everything, how simple it was, you'll go, well, next time I see that, and that might be in a commercial environment, I'll use it. So I think for us, the third sector, providing services to them, it is a win-win. We love doing that for free. We always will do it for free, but it absolutely has benefits for the business in terms of spreading the word and getting people used to it and adoption.
That's an interesting tactic to get people to sign up. So I use.
It's interesting, I think, on the basis that it wasn't a tactic. It is the fact that we either stopped where we were and served the number of charities that we were serving, or we tried to find a corporate sponsor with deeper pockets, which would have been a never-ending job, literally, or we found a solution to that problem. And the solution that we found has effectively removed completely the need for a corporate sponsor, because we don't have those payment costs to meet anymore. It's allowed us to scale that platform, essentially infinitely. There's no problem with so doing. But you're right, that has its upside in terms of gaining awareness of what we're doing and open banking generally.
And so what recommendation would you have for somebody that, say, has an e-commerce platform? So let's say somebody has a Shopify store or something like that, or another sort of e-commerce platform. Can they incorporate open banking payments?
Yep. We're working on integrations at the moment. Our first one is live in the UK with WooCommerce. So if you're a WordPress user and using WooCommerce, then you can get to checkout and put Wonderful at checkout and encourage your customers to use it. As I mentioned before, what I wouldn't do is what we did with the Wonderful Organization platform and say they can only use this. That's probably not a smart move right now. But I think what you'll see is that as retailers save that 90% on processing fees, and I say what you will see, we see this, is that gets promoted on the checkout options, on the payment options, because it makes sense for the merchant. Another comment I'd make around that is that, in taking that payment and promoting the loyalty scheme of a card so that people can save money and use VIP lounges at airports and things isn't really doing a great deal for you as a retailer. If you're saving that money and not promoting the card issuer's reward scheme, then you can put that saving into your own loyalty schemes, your own discount schemes, whatever it might be, to help promote your own business and build that engagement with your own customer base. So I think those are all the drivers that you'll see through merchants. In terms of the platforms, then we have a program of rolling out to as many as we can for those integrations with people like Shopify, Magento, Wix, BigCommerce, all of the different platforms, depending on where they are in terms of whether they're open to new payment partners. So they have commercial interests too, that sometimes include payment plans that they offer or partnerships that they might have with some of the cards too. And then we'll do the same thing with things like accountancy software packages. So integration with those.
I could see this also being of use to somebody, say, that has maybe a real estate fund or is conducting large transactions, right? I mean, if you're a certified investor in the U.S. and you are going to invest in a fund, in a private fund, private equity, whatever it may be, and you're going to give a large amount of money, then there's a large incentive to use something like open banking, right? I mean, even if you were to put it as the only option, somebody that's about to give you $1 million, has every incentive to go ahead and fill out the small form or whatever that's required to set it up. Is that correct?
It is and it isn't. The restriction that you have at the moment is that the underlying technology beneath open banking is really faster payments. And that has daily limits that are typically based on the bank's daily limits for individuals and small businesses. Now they can be for business accounts up to £1 million. But typically for an individual, you're going to have something in the order of £20,000 to £25,000 limit on a transaction. And it would be up to you to speak to your bank, because there are oftentimes you can get that rate changed depending on your profile and so on. But that's the thing that we see may change in the future as open banking develops more and more. But right now, single transactions, you're depending on your bank somewhere in that range of £20,000 to £25,000.
Do you see smaller banks coming up? So I feel like this could possibly foment competition within banks. If your limit is 25, my limit's 50, then I'm going to go with you. It's
exactly. No, I think that's exactly what will happen, and we see that. We've been surprised, I guess, and I won't mention names in terms of naming the banks, but some of the banks that we hadn't expected to see being used by merchants are being used in bigger numbers than we anticipated. And then we look at those rates, and actually that does seem to be bearing out what you're saying there, that oftentimes it's a smaller bank with a higher rate that the merchants' accounts are being signed up with.
That it sort of random thought came to mind is I recently saw this movie called The Bank of Dave about it's a little bit of a sidetrack, but about the first small bank being created in the UK in like 100 years being approved, and it's a true story. So for anybody, I don't know if you're interested to listen to it, to see it, but
title, I've not watched it, so now I will for sure.
Yeah, it was a funny, interesting movie. It was somebody up north that just like you wanted to set up a charity, and it was just easier to loan money in his small community through his own bank, and so he drove down to London and got it done. So
It's amazing.
so great movie. But yeah, let's maybe one last thing with the banking that I wanted to ask you about is as far as currency transactions, because if you haven't noticed, I'm interested in multiple currencies, live in different places. Um, how does that work with that trans? I mean, I know, if I'm pulling out of an ATM, as I'm saying, 100,000 pesos, which isn't much, but in Colombian pesos at least. I know I'm getting a certain amount of dollars and getting it over here. There's a bunch of transaction fees. There's the ATM fee. There's the my bank fee back in the US, and then there's just the Visa rate, which is going to be higher, as we were talking about with Wise and everything. Is there anywhere there that, not specifically, I know you were saying with ATMs, it's not open banking is not exactly a solution, but is there something that with currency transactions that open banking can help with?
I am sure there will be. I'm going to pass on answering your question in detail and defer to people who will probably know the answer much better than I do. The reason for that, as I say, is we are supremely focused on the UK
Hmm.
market. We're being approached a lot by even peers in our sector saying, "Yeah, we're operating in the EU. We'd love to work with you." And we say, yeah, but what we need to figure out is a way of making sure that those transaction fees remain incredibly low. And until we can figure that out and still take payments from Spain or from wherever, then let's park it for now. Now, that isn't to say that we won't be investigating this in detail. We absolutely will. But right now, we are very focused on the UK market, and we'll need to figure that out. There are also areas that are under development with open banking that are still relatively new, where price points haven't been fully established. So things like variable recurring payments, which again in the UK will be equivalent to a direct debit. So this is giving somebody authority to take a varying amount out of your account every month or whatever it might be. So typical thing might be a utilities bill where the amount you pay for electricity this quarter might vary from next quarter. Therefore, you're giving instruction to that merchant to say, I can take this money out of your account. And there are some details really to be thrashed out in terms of what the charges are going to be for those variable recurring payments using open banking. So there are a number of areas that we've just gone, do you know what? There's so much that we can focus on right now in terms of bringing this single domestic payment service to our UK customer base that we just have to kind of wait and revisit that in due course. It's a nice problem to have because, the great thing is we see a world of opportunity around what we can do with open banking, but it's definitely one step at a time just now.
And just to clarify, when you're saying the transaction fees, you don't necessarily mean the exchange rates. You're saying
no,
just the fee of the, yeah.
it's literally the fee of doing that. So yeah, the exchange rate will be another thing that we'll need to think through and work through how that operates. We'd like to do, I think, take the model that Wise seem to be taking of that mid-market approach. It seems to be very sensible, but so we'll look at that in due course for sure, Andres. But right now I don't have an answer on it.
Great. So can't talk about banking and not ask about crypto at all. So I'm wondering if there's anything you can say as far as that. I know this is sort of two worlds, um, but yeah, I was curious whether you had any opinions there.
Not especially. Again, I think one of the difficulties we've seen in our sector, and certainly in terms of the challenges of raising money, of some of the problems around crypto have been almost conflated with fintech in general. So it's made seeking investment and fundraising as businesses in any fintech space challenging over the last year or so, probably a bit more now. Um, there's absolute merit in crypto for sure, and we're seeing really good use cases. Even in the charity sector, I think a very large charity in the UK announced fairly recently that they were taking donations in crypto. Um, it's There's no doubt it's going to happen in terms of being in that kind of mainstream space, and I think there will be routes for us to look at how we work in that space when it happens. But again, right now we are just very focused on what we're doing in the open banking space. Um, So yeah, I mean, it's one again, a bit like the international transactions, variable recurring payments, so much opportunity. It's another thing that we'll be exploring in due course.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to it. Yep. So why don't we have a little bit of a change here? I know that you have some experience in your previous businesses with e-commerce, and I was curious to what extent and what sort of business that you or multiple businesses that you seem to have exited, right?
Yeah. Um, they've all had that same theme of being digital products.
Hmm.
We only ever tried one physical product business, and I often answer this question by saying stick to the knitting, by which I mean stick to what you know. And that was the time when it actually was a bit of a victim of its own success. And this was time 2005, I think. We launched a online hamper business at Christmas for vegans specifically. So I've been vegan for many, many, many years. And we thought this would be really good. It's really niche. It's really discoverable. So I think 2005, this is before any significant social media. People's dwell times after doing a search query on whatever it might have been were a lot longer than they are now, and a very, very focused market. So we thought, we'll give it a try. We can source some products, wrap them nicely, present them nicely, get them dispatched, and away we go. And it was one of those once only. So I think December the 23rd, we were still packing hampers at 11 p.m., waiting for the courier to pick them up the next day. And also realizing that we were short of one or two products that should be in there. So literally dashing around the country on Christmas Eve, trying to source a couple of things that should be in this hamper and send them out was just enough for me. So I think we didn't enjoy our Christmas dinner the day after. We managed to keep that business going. I think we did a Valentine's offer. And I think once Valentine's Day passed, we said enough, never again. So I think that whole, people do extremely well in this, but it's just not my bag. This whole idea of inventory stock, managing perishable items, it was just awful. So I'd much rather process zeros and ones and work in that online space. So yeah, it's mainly been online throughout.
And these are clothing hampers they were?
No, vegan food products.
Oh, vegan food products. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm sure comparing to, you said 2005, I guess a little less than 20 years ago, the whole e-commerce world for physical products is probably a lot easier. There's a lot of startups for logistics, for shipping your products and all
Absolutely.
these different things. So
Oh, for sure. There was no drop shipping. Certainly, I wasn't aware of any drop shipping options or anything like that. Not at all. No. I mean, this was literally sourcing some wholesalers. Again, all the issues around, well, we can sell you that product when you've got orders to this value, and then we'll give you this price point. And we're just starting, we haven't got any orders yet. So there were a lot of challenges that weren't foreseen by me at the early stages. It was one of those. Again, the kind of answer I give a lot is, it's great to start a business that you have a passion or an interest in. And that was it for me. It was like, I'm eating terrible food because I'm a vegan. There's no need for this. There are great things out there. Why should vegans have a rubbish Christmas? Let's put together something where they can actually open a hamper and go, oh, that's really great. So I think that passion almost clouded the logistical and planning and business research that I needed to do to get it started. I think we probably came up with the idea in October, and we were shipping products in December, having given it practically zero thought, which is unlike us, but I say driven by a bit of a self-passion.
yeah, I think there was a little bit of a British American loss of translation there when you said hamper. But now I understand what you're talking about. But so tell me what sort of digital products do you sell then? Because I'm more of a physical products person, and I'm sort of thinking of getting into the digital product world, but but it doesn't make as much sense to me. So I think I'm on the other side.
When I talk about digital products, what I'm talking about is something that you can order and have fulfilled without any physical product at all. But it's really more around services. So the very first one that we did in 98, which was as I'd started the web design business, I was looking for web design clients. And an obvious route to me was newly formed companies. I thought, well, if I can get in touch with a company formation agent, work with them on their client list, come up with some marketing plan about how do you approach these people, then that will be a great source of web design businesses or clients rather. And what happened as soon as I had a conversation with the guy who had a company formation business, he'd been trading offline for around 10 years. And I said, what do you think of the internet? He says, it's a waste of time. So you remember this is 1998. And he'd had a really bum deal with some advertiser or so on where they said, we'll get you loads and loads of clients. We'll put you online. And of course, it was online in a place that nobody ever found. It wasn't discovered. And he'd spent hundreds and hundreds of pounds on this deal. So he said, no, I'm not enamored of the internet at all. I said, well, what about if I build you a site where we do all the company formation online, collect all of the details from the customers, they pay online, and essentially there's no paperwork. So we'll deliver the company all of the documents via email. There's no binder to send out with a company formation certificate. We'll just completely digitize all of this product, which in 1998 was pretty ambitious. In fact, I think we ran a search at the time and we couldn't find anyone in the world that was doing online formations. Maybe wrong about that, but that was our view, that there wasn't any competition. So that was kind of the first venture into providing an online service. Now, what happened was that business grew in 3 months to the point where he was doing the same number of formations a week on the online system as he was doing offline for a 10-year-old business. So it just exploded and did really, really well. We moved from there, or I moved from there. So 2005, I mentioned, was probably about the time that we tried the vegan products business. But at the same time, we were approached, as I'd approached him, we were approached all the time by people looking for things to sell to newly formed companies. And the problem is that newly formed companies often don't have very deep pockets. So there weren't many services that would actually, everyone's thinking, oh, we'll sell them insurance, we'll sell them this, we'll sell them that. Give us a list of your companies, we'll do some deal on introduction fees and so on. And very little of it actually worked. But one of the things that worked very, very well was a telephone business. So we were providing a call management service on particular numbers for small businesses that allowed them to scale, have a number that was kind of not a local number. So it could be, they could look like they had a national presence, deliver that number to voicemail when they were out of the office. And then the voicemails would be sent via email. So it was all that call management type stuff. And it was one of the few things that, again, because it was a low cost point for the customers, worked really, really well. So it was about building that solution for them to be able to manage the whole thing themselves. And that, I think, has been a recurring theme throughout, whether it was company formations, I mentioned domain name registrations we did, telephony services and payments. For me, the key ingredient in all of them, there are a number, but one of them is around making yourself visible. And at the point people find you, I say from registering with the business right up to the point of, I want to move away from you and go somewhere else, making that process as easy as you possibly can. Because if somebody really wants to go, then again, you'll see companies trying to block that and so on. And we just think if you really want to go, then please go. Your experience of leaving this business should be as good as it was joining it. And then you'll go away with a good feeling about working with us. So really a lot of work in terms of process, in terms of automation, in terms of, low touch, but quality touch when the customer does need to get in touch with us, whether that's via email, via telephone, via whatever. We want to make ourselves super accessible, but also our sweet spot is when you actually don't need to call us because you can self-serve completely.
So you've been working with developers for 20 years now, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I started life as one, a very poor one by today's standards. But yeah, the web design business, I was coding. So that's what I did. I got a loan from the bank and set up doing, HTML and Perl scripts back in 98, 96, probably 97.
Loan for the bank for
an Apple Mac, I think it was. Yeah. So literally, when we finished with the training institute, where I wasn't getting paid, came back to the UK, had no money, and went to the bank and said, I've got this great idea. Me and the rest of the world, of course, it was that time. So, I want to be a web designer, but they thankfully gave me the money and away we went.
Didn't know you could get a loan for such a thing, but But
Maybe not these days, but
yeah.
yeah, no, they were very good. And it was a new account as well. It was kind of odd, really. So, but I'm glad they did.
Definitely got you started. But yeah, I guess that's a good stopping point. I think thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story. And um, I'd love to stay in touch, and we can maybe do this again sometime.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thanks ever so much, Andres.
Great.